Welcome, Nitty Gritty. This is going to be a fun one today. We have one of my really good friends and actually business partner that we'll talk about that later.
Plug.
Here it comes. Doctor, and you have to call him doctor because he went to all of that school for nothing. Fidel Montero.
That is the most expensive piece of paper, bro. I'm telling you.
It looks kind of cool, though. When
Doesn't it?
Your principal, it says doctor.
Yeah.
He has it on his office, too. Don't worry.
I do. Yeah.
As you should.
Yeah.
I would spell it out on your name tag, like not just DR. It would be like all caps, DOCTOR.
That's right.
But honestly, Fidel's one of the best dudes that I know, and it's been a lot of fun kind of working together on our project, and we'll get into that. But I want people to get to know Fidel a little bit because your story is incredible, and it's one you don't hear a lot of, and you also have kind of a perspective on education in school that most people don't have that are in your situation.
Yeah.
So you're currently the principal at Timpview High School.
That's right.
You've been a principal at Alta.
Two high schools, yeah.
And weren't you like the youngest principal in the state when you were at Alta?
I was.
So he thinks
I feel bad for all those kids too, man, and their parents. I was like, damn. They got me when I was really young.
Then in between, you went to UVU, which is the largest university in the state.
Yep.
And chief of staff,
Chief
right?
of staff, yeah. I worked with the president.
Which is basically like second in charge.
I was sort of the ham in the sandwich between the president and his vice presidents.
Yeah.
More like bologna, probably. It wasn't really good ham, but that's what I try to do.
So
it's a good sandwich.
Fidel, we got to start though. We're like growing up, because where you are now, people would probably expect a different story than what you have.
Yeah.
So let's get into a little bit on kind of growing up, family, that kind of stuff.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. This is a real treat, man. I'm telling you, Bam Bam's podcast. like you've reached a certain level of success when you sit at this table.
Sure,
man.
especially being male. We don't bring in many male guests.
Yeah, I'm telling you, bro. I'm feeling it. So thanks for having me. No, I appreciate the love. And I love education. I'm sure we'll get into the subject in a minute. And my upbringing definitely impacts where I'm at today, right? And if you would have told me when I was 16, 17 years old that I'd be a high school principal, I'd tell you, you're freaking crazy. I wasn't going to do that. I was in the principal's office, right, but for the wrong reasons. My story in some ways is unique, and yet in some ways I think it tells the story of a lot of Americans, right? I was born in the States. My parents immigrated here from Mexico, and they came here. My dad had a middle school education, and when he was about 13, my grandpa was like, "Dude, you're coming with me to work," right? Like he was the oldest of 11 kids, and they came here in the late 50s. Immigration was a different deal back then. You could come and go with a lot of ease. There was a lot of good partnersps back then where labor
it's still that way for us on this side.
Yeah, on this side it is. Yeah. You can go to Canada and
I'm rolling my eyes.
Yeah, right.
Kind of ridiculous.
I mean, right. The borders that we draw around each other, that's a whole other conversation. But so my dad started coming to the US when he was really little. When he was 19, 20 and he was back in Mexico, he'd go back and forth. He met my mother. They got married. He lied to her. He probably told her he owned a bunch of land in Mexico or in the US. She believed him. And then, she got here and realized that, he was just a migrant worker, hard worker, but didn't have a lot. And
that was in California.
That was in California, yeah. So Cam's from California. So most people think of California in terms of LA, San Francisco, maybe San Diego, and forget that there's a massive, community, a massive
it's
agricultural.
Like 10 states within
10
one.
10 states, right.
Like there's so many different parts of California.
And they grow, they feed the rest of the country, right? I mean, there's so much agriculture in California that people just forget about that. And
that's why Lake Powell's disappearing.
That's right. That's another topic right there, Cam.
We got a whole bunch.
I know. I'm telling you, somebody making a list. Put.
Got it.
Yeah. Come on, Brent. Start taking some notes, bro. But yeah, man. So somebody's got to work those fields, right? Somebody's got to prune the trees. Somebody's got to do the fertilizer. Somebody's got to pick the peaches. Somebody's got to, pick up the walnuts. Somebody's got to, water and irrigate the rice fields. And all that work is done by migrant workers, right? And my dad was one of those workers. And so that's the family that I was born into. If you go to the place, Gridley, California, where I was born, it's a small town, like just about, every small town USA. But my journey kind of took an interesting turn because when I was 2, we actually moved back to Mexico, and my parents sort of split up for a while. I went back, and my early child memories are growing up in Mexico, right? So I didn't learn English until I came back to the States when I was 12, 13 years old. So my first language is Spanish. And my early childhood memories.
What part of Mexico?
It's a little town called Colima. So it's just south of Guadalajara. It's a little coastal city. It's the smallest.
Santos.
Los Santos, right? It's the smallest state in Mexico. So it's just, little port city. So I grew up there, and my mom was a school teacher, in Mexico.
Okay.
And the story of my parents, they were like, it's an interesting story, right? Because he was dirt poor migrant worker over here in the U.S. My mom was one of the first ladies.
So he wasn't a landowner.
No, he was not a landowner. He lied.
He lied.
He lied. He got his girl though, man. It's the Lady and the Tramp story, man. I'm not kidding. Like my parents, dude. Like, and my mom came from a very dignified family, politicians in her line,
all from Mexico.
In Mexico. They're still there. And they, in Mexico, right, that some of the families, they looked down at the people who came to the US, right? Because they were like sort of, from a social standpoint, they're like, they're the least educated. They were the least sort of folks that they didn't own anything in Mexico, so that's why they came here, right? So it was an interesting dynamic, right? But that's where I was at, man. And when I was like 12, 13, my mom was like, look, we're gonna move back to the US, right? And I was pumped, right? Because at 12, when you're in Mexico, you look at the U.S. as like, man, that's the shiz, right? Like I'm gonna, McDonald's, all that stuff, right? Little did I know, right, that there's poor people in the U.S., right? And I was gonna be one of them. When we came to the U.S., although I was an American citizen,
I was gonna say, you had citizenship because you were born here.
Yeah, but nobody, I didn't know that, right? And I didn't even know what that meant, right? Like I came to, when we came back to the U.S., I still remember the first time I saw my dad's car, right? Like I was so pumped, right? Because I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to the U.S.
Was your dad still in the U.S.
He was
and your mom was in Mexico?
That's right.
So when you went back to Mexico, you were just with your mom down there?
That's right.
Okay.
And her family.
Yeah.
That happens a lot, huh?
It happens a lot, bro.
Yeah.
I started mentioning El Salvador, and I think outside of Mexico, they have more El Salvadorians in the U.S. than any other country.
Right. And in terms of like the economy, right? If you look from an economic standpoint, the amount of money that gets transferred
for sure
to those countries. But
that's why Western Union's still a company.
That's right. Western
Union. It's like, how in the hell are they still in business? And then I always forget. It's like,
bro, you go into one of those little, you go into the Mexican store here down the street, right? And right when you walk in, there's an exchange sort of, little desk, right, where you can send money back home, which is real, right? Like, I mean, a lot of families survive that way, right? So a
lot of businesses here survive
and a lot of
that
businesses survive that way. I mean, there's companies right now that are starting to try to facilitate the exchange of money, right, that way. So, which is cool, right? You got to give people credit for making those things easier. But yeah, man. So when we came back, I had a relationship with my dad, but it was distant, right? Like he was the guy that lived in the U.S., so I mostly grew up around my mother, her family. And when you grow up that way, you're still an outsider, right? So, I was the cousin who was born in the U.S. who moved to Mexico, right?
Right.
Whose dad wasn't around, and all my cousins, they had their families. They were Mexican.
You were kind of an outsider no matter where you were.
Bro, I'm telling you.
In Mexico, you're the outsider because you had gone to the U.S.
And then you come to the U.S. and you're the outsider here, right? Even we moved into what's called a labor camp. I don't know if any of you've had any guests, I doubt it, who have lived in labor camps in California, but they're just these subsidized.
I have a few that should.
Right?
Or should go to like a labor camp for like a prison sentence.
Yeah, so they can. Yeah, no, I'm telling you, bro. You go there and it's they're camps that housing, subsidized housing that that the government set up for migrant workers. Was
that hard for your mom to go from kind of
middle upper class in Mexico to all of a sudden you're poor in the U.S. Right? And it was, man, and this place, Cinder Block, like my backyard was a peach factory where they processed peaches, right? Tri-Valley growers. And, I hate those little freaking peach cans, right? Because the smell of them, dude. When you grow up smelling that syrup, all day long, especially in the summer in California, and then you're smelling peach syrup. You know what I'm saying? It's the worst, man. So I hope you don't do that with your pies. I hope you use real peaches, not those fake ones, man.
Never. But that's funny because if I ever did pie, it would be peach pie. I love peach pie. But yeah, would never. I'll use canned nacho cheese all day long. I love that crap. But not canned peaches.
Canned peaches.
Never.
No,
wait, why did you move back to the U.S.?
So my parents decided to get back together. Oh, yeah, my parents decided to get,
So did he tell her he finally bought some land?
I know, right?
He lied again?
He lied again, dude. My dad was a salesman, man. He was good. Until the guy he had middle school education, but he could sell lights to an Eskimo, man. Is that bad? That's probably bad to say, you know what I mean? But
let's not worry, but come on, people.
But no, my dad could sell, bro. My dad could sell, and he certainly sold my mother on stuff. So they just, I think they wanted to bring the family back together.
That's awesome.
And they came, so it was like, we had been apart for about 10 years, and I have 4 sisters. So I was they sort of, they just wanted to live together again.
Are you the oldest?
I'm in the middle, bro. So 4 Latina sisters. Wow. I'm telling you. You can do a podcast.
So conflict resolution. You're good at it.
Listen, man. Well, it was like, conflict resolution 101. It started at, with my sisters, and I love them, man. They're great. But it was, they knew, they knew who was in charge, and it wasn't me. Yeah. But so when they came back together, that was a whole different experience, right? Because talk about being an outsider. All of a sudden you come to the U.S., you're poor. When you go to the labor camp, even within the labor camp, right, you've got Latino kids, Mexican kids, most of them were Mexican-American, who, they've been living there since they were little. So all of a sudden you're the outsider coming into that space. You go to school and you don't speak English, right? So you're the outsider in that environment. And it gets tricky, right? On the one hand, it's tricky. And yet in terms of, survival skills, right, you sort of learn, you sort of learn to how to fit in different groups. You have to. Otherwise, you get sort of excluded. I'm telling you, I was really fortunate that I moved into a small community because I didn't get lost in the shuffle, right? I can't imagine what life would have been if we just moved to like a larger urban city where, a lot of immigrant kids are sort of segregated, right? People don't get to know them, right? And the little town that I moved into, it's one of those towns where you can play on the football team, you can be, on the band. I mean, you do everything, right? Because it's so small, right? Like Heber, where you grew up, right? Cam was like captain of the geek club and chess, and then played basketball, right? You can do everything,
drama.
Right? So you don't get lost, right? You don't get lost, bro. Like, and that was actually, I benefited from that, right? Because I got to know people who looked out for you. They invite you to do stuff, to play sports.
You bring up an interesting point, like where I grew up in like Long Beach, for example, and even Huntington Beach, like the Hispanic community grew and grew and grew. But you talk about gangs, like that's how that happens. Like you move into a bigger place like that and you don't have anybody watching your back. You don't have anybody, like you have nothing to do. Yeah. You're not getting on sports teams. You're not. Gangs become your community, right? It becomes community. That's what happens. Right. In these smaller towns, there was opportunity for me to get involved, right? That's why I've always been a huge advocate of youth sports, of kids getting involved in something, right? Because it gives them a sense of community. And so that's sort of, that was my upbringing. I went from, being in Mexico to coming to the U.S., learning English. That's hard, bro. Like I didn't read my first book till
I think I was a junior in high school, right? I just faked it, man.
Learning English would be...
It's a pain, bro.
Like learning Spanish is so much easier.
So much
right?
easier.
Like English is really the stupidest language ever made.
It's messed up, man. Yeah, it's hard. And I'm still learning it, right? I'm still, I still remember the first time I told somebody that they were full of shit. Right? Can I swear in the podcast, right? I actually used the word bullshit, right? Because I heard it, right? And I was like,
I know, it just doesn't really feel the same when it's not your first language. I was like, what does that mean,
right? So finally a friend of mine explained to me, when somebody's lying to you, you say, that's bullshit, right? And I still remember using it in context, right? I was playing with this kid. What was his name? Ignacio, right? Nacho. And we're playing marbles, right? So we were in the labor camp, right? And the kid cheated, right? He can't remember what game we were playing. I was like, bro, this was bullshit, bro. And I still remember using the word in context. I was so proud of myself. You know what I mean? But but it was fun, man. Listen, you don't know any different when you're poor, right?
Right.
You don't know any different when you go to the store and you want something and maybe you have to put it in your pocket because you don't have any money, right? Or even in high school, right? I still remember I played football. I still remember going on trips and we stopped to eat at McDonald's after the game and I was starving, bro, but I didn't have any money, right? So I tell the guys, no, listen, I'm not hungry, right? And I'm sitting there in my chair like my stomach's, growling because, but you just can't afford stuff, right?
Right.
And my parents were always working, right? So they didn't come to a lot of stuff. I remember sneaking my parents into the football game my senior year because they hadn't seen me play, right? And I still remember telling them, hey, meet me here.
But hold on, even just that, like, you had to sneak your parents into a football game your senior year.
My senior year.
You know what I mean? Like, how many kids grow up? I mean, kids, like...
If your kid's on the football team, do you still have to pay for tickets?
You got to pay for tickets, right?
I didn't think you did.
But even that, just think about the different dynamics, right? Like, growing up, like, you just don't appreciate how different circumstances can be.
Listen, bro, today...
Especially here.
As parents, right? We got parents filming practice, right? Like, and analyzing practice with their kids. And our involvement...
It's out of control.
Again, another conversation, right? But
I think we should have that one.
We should have that one today, Cam. But yeah, I mean, my parents, they worked, right? That's what they were doing. They worked. My senior year, they came to a couple of games. Again, I had to sneak them in, right? Because they didn't have money to pay for the gate, right? So that was normal, right? That was normal.
So even into your senior year, I mean, financially, things hadn't really changed in your life much.
No, my dad, when my dad passed away, I don't think he made over $20,000 his entire life, right?
Crazy.
There was a season where he made really good money, but then he lost it all, right? He became a contractor for a while, where he would hire guys to go do the work for larger farms, right? But then that didn't last very long. That was in the late 70s, but yeah, after that he got paid by the hour, right? Pruning trees, picking peaches, whatever. And it's hard work, man.
Did your mom teach when she came to the U.S.?
No, because she didn't have any English, right? And okay. That's part of the challenge when immigrants come to the U.S. Some of them come with a ton of capital, right? Social capital, education, right? But when they come here, we treat them as like if they don't know anything.
You could be a doctor.
You can be a doctor, right? And then you find yourself as a custodian, right? And then people treat you that way. So my mother, she didn't speak English, right? So she wasn't able to teach. She did emphasize literacy in the home, right? Which was one of the cool things that for me made a big difference, right? She read to us a lot. She valued sort of books and an idea. So
like, when did education become important? I mean, it sounds like even through high school, it wasn't really top of mind.
It wasn't. I got a 2.0 so I could play sports, right?
Oh,
that was
I know somebody that did that.
That was the goal.
Oh wait,
Cam.
no, he didn't even do that. I made all the teams and I got kicked off like a month later when the report cards came out.
Was the goal. I mean, honestly, I didn't I didn't realize the potential that education had probably till later on, right? My senior year in high school, I had a counselor who was like, look, what are your plans after high school? And I didn't have a lot of plans, right? And he's like, why don't you go take the ACT, right? And I was like, bro, how do you spell that? Like, what do you mean by that, right? And I think he must have signed me up for it, right? Because I didn't sign up for it. He's like, look, go take this test. This is where you got to go. And, I stayed up Friday night, chilling, listening to to Tupac. And, that was the era, right?
Real music.
Dr. Dre. I love these kids. They walk around with their Tupac shirts,
Right.
Or
they've probably never even listened to him.
Yeah, or Biggie, right?
He's got a vintage shop.
That was mid-90s, right? That's what we were listening to. But stayed up that night, took the test. I got my name right, I'm sure, right? But here's the thing, right? Those tests, they were the gatekeepers, right? If you took a test, then all of a sudden you could apply for a 4-year college. Right. There were some programs that were intended at that time in California, that were intended to help first generation kids, go to college. So because I took that test, I got in some list. I got invited to go to it was a summer bridge program at Cal State Chico, where I went, and that was a whole different experience, right? Like going onto a college campus, having people sort of mentor you, little things like, bro, when you go to college, like it's not so much what you know, it's like how you approach it, right? So they taught me the business of college. Like, look, go introduce yourself to a professor, let them get to know your name, sit in the front row, ask a question every class. So like, if you have an issue with a grade, then you can go talk to the professor and they know you, stuff like that, right?
Right.
They taught you how to study. And that was the first time that sort of like, I was like, okay, I can do school, right? Before that, I think teachers were nice to me, right? And the expectations in my high school weren't very high. It's a small school. They, in comparison to like the school that I lead now, they didn't have any advanced courses. They didn't have any of that kind of stuff, right? So going to college for that, that summer between my senior year in high school and my freshman year in college, it was a wonderful sort of bridge, right? That gave me great skills. Cal State Chico was a crazy place, man. It was the #1 party school in the country right at the time. So, another cool topic camp that we can tackle later. But
so how did you go from there to BYU?
That's a good question, bro, because from the #1 party school in the country to BYU, right?
Right.
To be honest, right, like I wasn't a very religious guy growing up, but my mom was Catholic, and they joined the LDS Church when they were, I think they were. My mom was pregnant with me when she was baptized, right? Okay. So I've been baptized like 3 times, right? Just in case.
You're good.
I'm telling you, bro, I got like backup insurance.
Yeah, you're right.
She was baptized when I was born. Then I was baptized Catholic, Mormon. So I've got some coverage, bro.
Yeah.
Like, there's some good stuff there. But yeah, no. So my parents joined the church. I think honestly, it was a good business move for my dad, because the LDS community owned a lot of land in Northern California, farms, right? So I think my dad was like, dude, how do I get this contract, bro? And he joined the church, right? And he got the contract.
Dunk.
I'm telling you, right? That's when he was doing the contracting stuff, right? The contracting business.
It'd be so easy to be a missionary up there. Listen.
Got something for you.
Listen.
No, so when I went to college, I blew out my knee, right, playing football, which, that did a job on me. And then I had 3 really close friends of mine pass away, right? So, at 19, I was a mess, right? I was thinking like, holy cow, man, these dudes who I know well, who I grew up with, who died like literally at 18, 19.
How'd they die?
Just different goofy stuff, man. Different. They had, one of them drowned. Another one was in a car accident. He was drinking. Another one was in a farming accident. So when that stuff happened, right at 19, I just started sort of like saying, gosh, this is crazy, right? There's got to be more to life than like partying at Chico State, right? And I actually had a friend of mine who was LDS, who didn't, we were really close. He didn't know my family was LDS, because we weren't really like active, members. And he had gone on a mission, right? So, it was crazy, bro. At 19, I was like, you know what? Maybe I had to do one of those mission things, right? Like, maybe I should do that thing, wow. Right? And I went in and I talked to the bishop at the time. My hair was bald. I had earrings, and I was like, bro, how do you do those mission things, right? And, you know, he helped me, right? Like, he helped me kind of get through it. And he's like, well, you know, have you ever read the Book of Mormon? I was like, what is that? You know, and I ended up in Texas, out of all places, right? Serving an LDS mission. I still remember I think it was like my second day on the field. I left my companion because I heard that Tupac had died, right? And I was so devastated, bro. And I had to go find the newspaper, right? And then my companion was like from Arizona, one of those guys, you know. He was like a straight arrow. He was going to be prophet of the church, you know. He's like, probably, or what's that other snowflake? Snowflake. But you know, so I left them, and because I had to go buy the newspaper to read about Tupac, right? But that was the state of mind that I was in. But, you know, after the mission, back to your question behind it up at BYU, my mission president was like, look, why don't you consider going to BYU? And I was like, BYU, bro. I was like the only kids that I know that went to BYU, that went to my high school, like, we're not it. You know what I mean? I'm like, you want me to go to BYU? Like, are you for real? And, you know, I wasn't totally wrong, you know.
You're still right.
But I ended up coming to BYU, man. By that point, I had gone to college for about a year and a half, you know, and I was just like a little kid, like from a learning standpoint, right, at a candy shop, like stuff started to make sense. Like I read something, I was like, damn, like words actually tell you something when you read, right? I started writing and expressing myself in a way that like it was cool, right? I started studying. I grabbed on to sort of economics. I loved econ, right? And how
I got to back you up. I have to ask a question. So how do you go from 2.0, like just to play sports, to like actually caring about? Because you go to Chico State, but like. So there's get in doesn't mean like all of a sudden.
There's actually there's a good body of research that shows that when you learn a second language, right, it takes you about 5 to 7 years to learn academic language. Right. It takes you about 1 to 2 years to learn what's called your basic interpersonal skills, right, where you can conversate, right, missionary kind of language. Right. But to learn academic language, it takes 5 to 7 years. I'm telling you that because by about my senior year in high school, that was about year 5, year 6 that I had been here in the U.S. So that academic language started kicking in right at that point. So
you
right?
could actually understand.
That's what I'm saying.
Your grades weren't, because see, I just assumed you were doing it like me. It's like, it's funny. Do you know how many smart kids get 2.0s? They're smart enough to just stay right above the line. These kids would probably be 4.0 like, I'm a smart guy, but like, I just hated school.
Yeah.
But I wondered, like, was it a language thing or was it just like...
Well, it's a combination of things, right? Like school, I mean, you know, school was hard, you know, in terms of like, I mean, you know, when you don't speak a language, you're like, whoa, bro, like, what are you talking about, right? Yeah. Like, you just don't understand your teachers. So for me, like by year 5, year 6, I started actually understanding what I was supposed to be reading. I started to sort of be able to express myself, right? You know, from a writing standpoint, and I actually enjoyed it, right? Like I finally discovered that learning was sort of fun, right, for me, you know. And this was, by that point, I was 18, 19, right? And so, in answer to your question, right, like I got through high school out of pure like just charisma, I guess, or because it was a small town, right, and everybody got good grades. Again, the expectations weren't very high in my high school, right? And now, having said that, right, I had good relationships with my teachers, right? They were my coaches. And talk about, for me, what mattered, right, getting me through high school, it was the relationships. It had nothing to do with what I was learning, right? We put so much stock into, you know, does my child know, you know, calculus when they leave high school? And it's like, well, do they know how to build relationships, right? So for me...
Think about the different cultures, like you had parents split for 10 years, you lived in the U.S., then to Mexico, then back to the U.S., then your parents are back together, then a religion. It's like, I'm telling you learned more just by doing that than anything you were going to learn.
Yeah, that's why I still go to a therapist, man. You know.
Well, that's not a bad thing.
I'm still working it out.
That's not a bad. But like, you got to. That's survival mode, right?
It was
that's more education than that will suit you better than.
Well, it's more practical. It's
way more practical.
Well, listen, when I think back of what helps me today as a professional, what helps me as a father, what helps me, you know, as a friend, as a brother, it's certainly not what I learned in school, right?
It's not calculus.
No, it's not calculus. Don't put calculus in front of me. But it was like, how do you get through hard stuff, right? Yeah. How do you sort of, you know, figure out, I blew up my knee, like I mentioned, my senior year in high school. I still remember my parents weren't at that game, right? So I'm sitting in a freaking in a car, right, in a hospital, in a ambulance, and I'm by myself, right? And the paramedics like, hey, are your parents here? I'm like, well, no, they weren't able to come, right? It was an away game. And so I'm in that. So they're like, okay, we'll get you to the hospital. Too. We're out of town, right? So then I'm calling my parents from the hospital. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm at the hospital. I blew up my knee. But that kind of stuff, like, that's what makes you grow up, right? It's stuff that like just pushes you, like, and you don't realize you're getting pushed. You know what I mean?
Until you have to look back to see it, right?
Right, exactly.
Like, because I mean, so me growing up, my parents get divorced. I go to 5 different grade schools in 6 years. For me, it's just normal, right? It's like, it's like change was the only constant thing. And so not until you look back that you're like, oh, that wasn't normal. Not everyone was doing that. Not everyone went to a different school every year.
That's right.
But all the stuff you learn it's
huge benefit.
It's irreplaceable.
It is. So yeah, dude, like,
so now you're at BYU, right?
I'm a fish out of water.
Are you taking education seriously at this point?
Yeah, by that point I was interested, right, in learning, and more than anything, right, I was interested in what education can do for me, right? At that point, I finally figured out, okay, look, I guess a college degree will get you money, right? My knowledge was still limited, and by that point, I said, look, what's the job where I can make the most money, right?
How are you paying for school right now?
I got a lot of grants, right? Thank goodness for Pell Grants and scholarships. Because it wasn't like I could go home to my parents and say, hey, can you write me a $5,000 check for school, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was Pell Grants, it was private scholarships. Okay. That sort of got me through school, right? So, and by that point, I was thinking that I wanted to be a stockbroker. I just looked up, hey, who makes the most money? Which college degree? And I was, being a stockbroker, right? Go to New York. And what was interesting, what happened in this, how I ended up in education, because it certainly wasn't about the money, right? Somebody should have told me that part. I was working at an elementary school as a playground supervisor, right? Dunking on the little 6th graders, right? Like, all right, you little frickers. Here I come down the lane, right? And I was it's the coolest job, right? Working at this little middle school here in Provo, or elementary school. And I'm in the hallway and I met this lady, right? She was in there kind of walking around. Started talking to her. I realized that she was from LA and she was visiting Provo because this school, Timpanogos, was implementing a school reform framework that came out of this group out of Los Angeles. So she was a consultant for this group. And like in a 10-minute conversation, she invited me to do an internship in LA, right? And I was like, okay, cool. I wasn't studying education or thinking education at the time. I was just working at the elementary school, right? Like I said, I was the best playground supervisor in America. And she invited me to do this job in LA, and I went out there that summer working for this firm that was working with some of the most at-risk schools in California, right? So I ended up working in South Central Los Angeles, in Compton, California, in the San Fernando Valley, working with schools that were trying to turn around and make improvements, right? With the framework that this consulting group was sort of, helping them with. And so that was my first experience with education, right? And it just sort of like, I'm telling you, bro, like being there and seeing what good leadership could do, it just like sparked my interest, right? And I was like, dang, like there's some work to do here, right? Because I'm walking through these schools and I'm seeing all these kids who just mirror back to me how I grew up. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And yet they were in schools that were just shitty, right? Like they weren't
because they're in bigger cities. To your point, they're just kind of getting lost in the system.
Poor cities.
Yeah.
Poor cities.
Like every place you just mentioned. It's like San Fernando Valley, like all that.
Yeah. Compton, yeah. Like so and yeah, what's crazy, there's schools like that here in Utah, right? All over the place. So that was my first sort of experience with education. It sort of happened by chance or serendipitously with meeting Greta Pruitt. I came back to school and I was like, dude, I'm going to go into education. And I was like, if there's a God out there, please know that I'm changing my major. I'm going into a career where I'm not making any money.
You say 2 different prayers,
right?
The Catholic God,
I prayed to
Mormon
both,
God.
and you know, to make sure I got heard. Yeah, dude, and I changed my major to a teaching degree, and I continued my affiliation with this company out of LA. It was called the Urban Learning Centers, and got a teaching license, got a job teaching middle school right off the bat. And so that's sort of like, that was my start into education.
So you graduated college, and then that was your first job out there, or you were working for them while you were in college?
I was working with them while I was in college.
Okay.
Yeah, which was kind of interesting because I'd go work with schools as a 20, 21-year-old kid who didn't know anything about education, but I'd go help principals, change their schools, right?
Yeah.
And which was nuts. That was crazy. So that was sort of my first experience going into in sort of just getting my feet wet in the field of education. Okay. But it had to do with, I think working in LA, and just having this sort of moment where it's like, okay, what are you going to do with your career? What do you want to do? Like, do you really want to go make all this money, or do you want to actually make an impact, right? Make a difference? And it was like this gravitational pull, right, towards that field, and it's been awesome, man. I've loved it.
So when did Ivy League come into play? Like when did masters?
So I started
doctorate?
teaching. I got my bachelor, started teaching, and then I started to realize that the biggest impact on a school is who leads it, right? Like,
so not just a teacher,
right? That's right. Now, teachers make a huge difference, right? Sure. Obviously, but if you're talking about the person who has the largest impact in education and in schools, is those who lead it, principals, right? Yeah. And that started to become pretty apparent, right? And again, I don't want to be misunderstood. Teachers make a huge difference, but a teacher in a school of 2,500 kids might impact 100 kids, or 200 kids, and yet the principal is impacting that entire group.
Yep.
So that's when I started sort of, getting an interest in becoming a school leader, right? So then I started looking up sort of, okay, well, where can I get my best education for that, right? I did get a master's at BYU, but then I also, I figured that Stanford, Columbia, and Harvard were like the top schools that were educating the best educational leaders in this country, right? And I said, what the hell? Why not? I'm going to apply to one of those places and go get a doctoral degree, right? And
just crazy.
And I listen, man. My senior year in high school, if you were to say, what's an Ivy League school? And I'd be like, what? I don't know. What you tell me, right?
Yeah.
So when I looked up the top leadership programs in the country, Columbia was at the very top, Teachers College. And I was naive enough to think that I could get in, right?
Yeah.
And so I applied, and there was a program that was specifically for it was for people that wanted to be urban superintendents, right? And I applied to that program, and I think they had I can't remember, I heard at one point 500 applicants or something, and they took a group of 10 of us, 10 or 12 of us to be part of the cohort. And I found myself, accepted to Columbia University, right? When I told my mother I was going to school at Columbia, she's like, that's kind of dumb. Out of all the universities in this country, you can go to Colombia, right? And she's like, why?
That's where all the money is, Mom.
Right?
You heard of Pablo?
Well, that's right. She thought I was going into a different kind of business, right? But it wasn't our culture, right? Like some families, they're 3-generation Ivy League, 4-generation Ivy League, families. Or legacy families. That's like the admissions colleges like to label them, right? You're a legacy student, So just, because your grandpa went there, or they donate a lot of money, right? So for me, I was charting new territory, right? And by that point, I had gotten a bachelor's. I sort of had a sense of education, and I did well in school. It came easy, right?
You did your master's too by that point, right?
Yeah, right. So so going to school in New York was remarkable, bro. Like I had never been east of 900 East, right? So like literally, right? Well, I was, by the time I got into Columbia, I was, in my late 20s. And so flying to New York was a whole different experience. I still remember getting to New York, and I had an address, right? And it was like 123rd between Amsterdam and Broadway. Didn't mean a damn thing to me. I was like, what is it? It's just an address, right? And I remember, getting there, and I had never felt lonelier, right? Because like you get to the city and it's just buzzing, right? Like people everywhere, everybody's running around. And you don't know a soul, right? Like you don't know anybody, right? So you show up and you just have an address, and but again, right? Talk about doing hard things, right? Like in some ways, it wasn't a lot different than moving to the U.S., right? I just, I showed up to New York, and I was like, I'm here to do school, right? And honestly, that was probably from an educational standpoint, that was one of the coolest experiences, right? I got to study with some of the best educators in this country. My classmates are leading some of the largest, school districts in America. I've had some of my classmates. One of them, right now, she was over all of curriculum for New York City schools. One of my roommates was the student body president at Stanford. Worked with Condoleezza Rice. It was cool, man. I got and
call
again,
her Condi.
Was you? Yeah,
I shook her hand twice. You shook her hand.
We met her.
Yeah,
you met her, Condoleezza Rice.
Yeah.
So yeah, man,
she welcomed us to the Masters.
Yeah.
What's
No
that?
big deal.
She welcomed us to the Masters.
It's a tradition unlike any other. It's fine.
Right. So yeah, man, I'm telling you, man, like and here we are, right? Like still trying to create change in schools. Applying all the stuff that I've learned. The relationships run deep, right? With some of my best friends that I've met were, in New York, and classmates that I had. So,
what's the most frustrating thing for you coming back now? Back into maybe high school, experiencing the highest form of education, right? So you experience this highest form of education, just the structure of it. From what I've learned from you, because I definitely didn't do that, but talking to you about just the structure, like to get your doctorate, it's not a multiple test quiz, multiple choice. You know what I mean? It's a body of work. Like how do you take that and bring it into the structure of high school?
Well, if you're talking about, you can spend a day talking about some of the frustrating aspects of education. I think perhaps one of the most difficult things for me to see, right, is that as amazing of these as opportunities as I've had, a lot of that stuff happened by chance, right? It wasn't designed, the opportunities weren't by design, if you may, right?
Like you couldn't confidently tell a kid, you couldn't confidently look at yourself as a senior in high school and say, this is how you're going to do this. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, and the systems that we have in place, right? The systems that we have in place in schools are not necessarily designed to create opportunity for kids. You know what I mean? And a lot of times when folks reach a certain level of success, either happens because of your social capital that you come with, because of the home that you were born into, or in the size of your garage. It comes because you had just, good luck. Opportunities presented themselves out of luck, or again, you come from families that have, that opened up doors for you, right? I tell folks all the time that our best students are not necessarily our best students. They have the best managers, right? They have the best, they at home.
What is that? Oh, okay.
At home, right? They've got parents who understand how the system works, who open up doors for them.
They know the rules of the game.
They know the rules of the game. They advocate for them, right? And nothing against that, right? I mean,
they're a pain in the ass, aren't they?
Many of them are a pain in the ass.
Oh man,
I'm telling you, a lot of wonderful. Look, a lot of good families, but then some of the stuff that people worry about, right, for their kids. A lot of it is fear based, right?
Yeah.
They're afraid that their kids are not going to have the same level of success. So they try to protect it, right? Try to protect that sort of privilege that they have, right? And when you live your life
all
that
about
way,
themselves.
well, when you live your life protecting, you become fearful, right? So you're constantly projecting, you're constantly sort of, trying to protect your little, piece of the pie. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but when you do that, what sucks is like, try sending that kid to Columbia. You know what I'm saying? Like they may get in, but I mean, the fact that you could just show up, like you think about all those things that you learn not having.
That's right.
Somebody just hanging over your shoulder.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Plus, it sounds like there's a couple things that really stand out. I don't know your parents, but it sounds like you got like a pretty good mix of both of them.
Yes.
Because you got the salesman side, you got the charisma, but it's interesting that your mom was a teacher, right?
That's right.
So how cool is that?
Well, listen, man, I got the best of both worlds.
That's what I'm saying. Except the land. You didn't get the land.
I didn't get any damn land.
The land.
I'm still mad at my dad over that,
What a jerk.
I got really the best of both worlds, right? I had enough literacy. I had enough sort of appreciation for learning through my mother. And from my dad, man, the dude was just a hustler, right? Just a hustler. And in terms of work ethic, in terms of just like getting up every morning, not giving a damn about where you're going to go work, finding work, and just, if there's one characteristic about my family that I think got us through is we laughed a lot, bro. Yeah. Which we didn't take things too serious. You know what I mean? We were dirt poor, If, we knew when the bill collectors would show up to the house who tell us, hey, you got a day to pay your electricity bill, otherwise we have to cut it. We'd laugh about that kind of stuff, right? Like, no big deal. If somebody came to my house now and they're like, hey, you don't pay your bill by tomorrow, we're going to cut your electricity, we'd be freaking out, right? Like my dad was like, hey, let's just turn up the music, tell them I'm not here, I know I know Larry, he's going to come again, right? And, there was something about coping with poverty with laughter, that we don't know how to deal with that stuff today, right? We're so worried, we're overly anxious as a society, and I think wealth does that to you. When you're wealthy, you all of a sudden try to protect that wealth, so it makes you anxious, it makes you judgmental, it makes you project fear, right? And when you think you're losing that it creates it messes with your head, right? As opposed to saying, you know what, I'm lucky enough to have this. It could go any moment, and I'm going to live my life with abundance, but with an abundance of giving, right? And abundance of service. That's a whole different paradigm. You know what I'm saying? So growing up in a home, I think, back to your point, right? I feel like I got the best of both worlds from my parents in that sense.
Right. Well, what's crazy too is, look at Timpview. I had no idea until we've spent the last year and a half working on stuff together. I didn't realize all the stuff you're doing in Timpview, but also like the challenges of Timpview, right? Like,
yeah, Timpview, I think Timpview is emblematic, right, of a lot of society.
Because so like I went to high school here. I hear Timpview, and I just think of rich kids on the hill.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like that's the first thought that comes in.
Yep.
But it's not.
It used to be that way, though.
There is that.
Right?
It's there, but it's crazy how different it is.
Well, Timpview is a good case study. And for those of your listeners who they're not, understand what Timpview is. Timpview is it's a high school here in this community that, when it was first built and through the first probably 30 years of its existence, it was a very affluent, community, a very affluent, demographic of students, right?
Were the boundaries always the same?
They've changed a little bit, but the city has changed a lot too, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, if the boundaries went out that far, didn't mean there was a lot of people there yet.
That's
but
right.
Like, as we've grown, that's kind of filled in.
I think if you look at the history of our school, it tells the story of the community, right? It's become more diverse, more poverty in the community, but you also have had more, you have more wealth as well, right? I think you have some wealthier folks and folks that are a lot, that are a lot more poor as well.
What's been cool though too is you've talked a lot about like the diversity of the students, but also of your staff.
That's right.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, one of the things that we sort of have prided ourselves in as a leadership team has been to try to hire, when we have the opportunity to hire folks, to try to diversify, who's teaching our kids, right? And because as a student, if you're a student of color, if you're a student who grew up like I grew up, one connection with an adult in your high school that can relate to you can mean the difference between, you going to college or you going, doing something after high school or just feeling completely disconnected, right? So yeah, when almost 40% of your kids, live in poverty, when almost, 40% of your kids are diverse, you want to have staff, hopefully that represent, some of those demographics. So yeah, we've tried to diversify our staff and make sure that we have, math teachers, coaches, counselors who, kids can relate to, right? And it makes a huge difference, right? Yeah. So,
well, you kind of brushed over. I bet people would be kind of shocked to hear that 40% of your students aren't white.
Yeah, in Provo, Utah, man, we're hitting that number.
That's crazy.
It's approaching that for sure. If you look at Provo High School, if you look at Timpview High School, if you look at a high school like Mountain View, these are all schools that are in Utah County. All of those schools are approaching almost mid 30s, 40%, minority students, right?
Well, and I think that's really interesting because you're going to have kids that grew up like you, but they're going to be making friends with some of the wealthiest people in the state are in the same boundary.
Look, man, I tell people all the time, right? One of the magical things about a public high school, right, is that you can have a kid, in theory, right, whose parents run the largest venture capital firm in the state, sitting next to a kid who lives in a trailer that cost their parents, $25,000, right? When they bought it. Now, that was before inflation hit. Conversation, right? That little trailer might be worth a little more now. Yeah, but I literally have that dynamic, right? Where or kids that play a sport together. Now we still have a lot of work to do for, as much of an emphasis that we're placing on inclusion as a school. We still have work to do, right? And it's still scary for kids. Kids they're vulnerable, right? They're emotionally going through a lot of changes, and for them, when you say to them, "Look, go meet somebody new, meet somebody who doesn't mirror back to you what you see every day of the week, what you see on Sundays," it's still hard for them, right? They're still kids, they're still insecure. So again, but if we can model that as the adults, right? Hopefully they can see that. If we can model that as a mission, right, and tell that story. Hopefully that's helping, right?
So talk just really quick before we kind of pivot. Talk little bit about college, because I think you are one of the only people. I mean, if you look at your resume, right? High school principal twice, chief of staff at a university, Ivy League education. I mean, if anyone would preach every single kid needs to be in college, it would be someone with your
too smart for that.
With your pedigree. You know what I'm saying? But what I've appreciated is like your realistic approach to what it is, right? Because college isn't maybe what it says it is, or there's a business side to it that people aren't willing to open their eyes to.
That's all it is.
And
not all it is.
Well, I'm sure
it's getting our country in massive trouble.
It's insane.
I'm sure you've heard the saying, right? That your bachelor's, your BS is just, like what I was saying earlier, right? It's just like bullshit, right? Yeah. And then your master's is your MS, right? So it's more shit, right? And your PhD is just piled higher and deeper, right?
I don't know, dude. You get doctor in front of your name. I think it was all worth it. I think you either stop at bachelor or high school. That's where I stop.
Here's the thing, right?
Or go all the way.
There's a role for universities in this country and in society, right? If you think of what distinguishes America as a nation, one of the things that distinguishes it is its ability to have these remarkable institutions of learning where they're finding new things, they're looking for new solutions, they're innovative, right? They have that flexibility. And, I'm grateful, right, that we have that, right? That there's really, smart people out there who care about, how you can do better with technology, with energy, with disease, that are studying that kind of stuff, right? Because that's what makes us better, right, as a society. Now, does every child need to take a route to, career to profession through a PhD route. No, hell no. I hope not, right? I think that's not the case, right? Unfortunately, in colleges today, a lot of professors that are teaching college went through a PhD, went through a training that was geared towards, being researchers, right? And then they in turn go teach English, 101 class, as if that kid who's in that 101 class wants to be a researcher. Right. Guess what? They don't, and they don't need to. And they don't need to, think that way. Maybe they need to think that way, but they certainly don't need to, go spend.
Then you understand learning how to ask a question is way more important than learning what the answer
is.
I need to learn to not pay to go to high school English again. Because that's what English 101 is.
Look here,
what a crock of crap.
And here's the reality, right? Higher ed was developed. It wasn't developed to educate all kids. It was developed to weed out kids, right? It was developed to, and the people. If you really look into the history of higher education, right, it's actually really messy, right? It was behaviorists who, put together, standardized tests to say, only these group of people belong in
it was meant to
college.
The kids who couldn't do that.
That's right. It was meant, and then since then we've tried to shovel these kids into that system, which again, it for all the issues that it has a role in society. Sure. I definitely believe that. But does every kid need to go to college and go get a master's or a PhD? To me, the answer is no. I mean, I think.
Education was designed to take a farmer and turn him into a factory worker.
That's right.
If you look at it, that was literally their mission, was to take farmers and turn them into factory workers. And what are factory workers? They show up, they do their job, they don't ask questions, they're submissive, and then they go home and they move on. Right? Like that's what college is designed for, to turn kids into this.
And if you look at our economy today, right? Kids are not going to go work at a job for 30 years and then get a pension, right? Nope. They kids are having to, they're having to go into an economic environment that requires a lot of creativity, a lot of sort of, it's relationship sort of things, right? How do you connect with others? How do you build business and innovation for services that people need, right? That perhaps even don't exist yet, right? So those are the skills that kids need to have, right? So does a kid need to calculate, trig in order to, do some of that stuff? Maybe if he wants to go discover, how a rocket works, and which is cool, right? Let's get those kids out there.
I use trig on my briskets every day.
That's right. That's right. You're using chemistry, right?
That's right.
So, kids need skills still, right? I hope people are not hearing me say that kids don't need, kids absolutely need skills to enter into a workplace and then into economy.
But they're not getting the skills.
That's right. We're lacking.
Right?
YouTube's better education than most of those.
Well, how many of our guests that are insanely successful went to the school of YouTube?
Yeah, I did. That's where I started. I would call me insanely successful. I mean, I'm sort of successful.
You're digging for a compliment. I'm not going to give it to you. You're just looking for it.
I did a birthday post yesterday. I got plenty of compliments. No, but that's what I'm saying. Like you can't. I can go out and learn anything that I want to, even trig, even you know what I'm saying. Like,
because the answer to the problem is not because of technology. So when education was created, the answers were hard to come by. They were in the book, so you had to learn how to find them. Now, I can ask Siri, and I can get the answer to anything.
Right.
So it's not about knowing how to find the answer. The skill is knowing how to ask the question.
That's right.
But no one's teaching that.
That's right. But if schools can do that, right? If schools can really, and there's a lot of cool stuff happening in schools that perhaps they're not getting credit for, that I think is innovative, that's teaching kids. Like, for example, at our school, every freshman that comes into our school, they learn how to work in a collaborative group, right? They learn how to advocate for themselves. When they don't know an answer to a question, we have teachers that put them in groups where the kid who doesn't know the question stands up in a group of 4 and they're asking their classmates for help, right? They're learning how to organize their planners. They're learning how to take notes. Anyway, so there's skills like that, and there's stuff happening that's really cool in public schools, but not enough of it, right? And, back to in terms of if schools really focused on saying, hey, what are the skills that kids are going to need as they enter into, whatever the workplace, whatever professions they're going into, right now in 2022, I think the results would be different, right? We get so caught up on bells. We get so caught up on grades, right? Grades become currency, right? And unfortunately, a lot of schools are responding to the customer, right, which are parents, and a lot of parents are so caught up in, does my child have an A, as opposed to saying, has my child learned a damn thing?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Because I'm telling you, there are classes that I've taken where I've gotten C's, where I learned a hell of a lot more than a class where I got an A. Does that make sense?
For sure.
So grades are not created equal, right? And learning is not equal. So so part of their reaction from schools is they're also responding to what parents, are sort of like valuing.
It's the structure, right? You can only do so much inside of what's rewarded.
That's
what
right.
behaviors
What's
are rewarded.
sad too is those are the customers that maybe we don't want talking to the schools because they're the ones freaking out about everything. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't remember the last time I looked at one of my kids' report cards. Like, if I know their homework's being turned in, I know they can read. Like, I know that socializing is way more important to me than. And I mean, I have my background. Like, I look at my school life and I was like, I could have gotten an A in every class. Like, I know I'm smart. I just didn't like doing it. So it's like, I don't want my kids to just do that. But I was so terrified. Like, the crap I tried to pull when report cards came out, like not coming home, hiding them, lying about them. Like, I was so scared about grades. Like, but all along they had this smart kid that could go anywhere, talk to anybody. Teachers loved me. Like, like, why was I in so much damn trouble all the time because of a freaking grade?
Yeah. Well, because that's where the value that, I mean,
right.
we've added a lot of value to grades, right? We've defined success for kids as, are you getting a 4.0? Are you a master pianist? Are you a professional athlete by the time you're, 14? Are you, what I'm saying? Do you have are you perfect in essence in whatever, a lot of parents, we get so caught up in wanting our kids to be successful by our definition of success, right? Which is totally misplaced, right? This last year I gave a graduation talk, which it was interesting because it was my oldest daughter was graduating from high school, right? And I was freaking out, right? Because I'm like, man, what am I going to say? I'm a parent, and I've given a lot of graduation speeches. This one was different. And I didn't have a speech like the day before because, I was, I think, putting too much stock into it. And it finally came to me, right? And I gave this talk that has really resonated with a lot of the parents that heard it. Because what I talked about, I just spoke from the heart, right? And I told the kids, I go, look, I'm gonna talk to you guys as a parent today, not as a principal. And then I told the kids, when you guys were first born, right? Like when we first held you, like as our little kids, I go, that's probably the one time where you experienced unconditional love from us as parents, right? And then you took your first step, and all of us thought, I have an Olympic, runner, right? And then you read your first letter, and you're like, I have a Nobel Prize,
but
right?
It's like, hold on, you didn't walk until 11 months and 2 days.
And
this kid walked at 10 months.
And we start comparing, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, we start putting conditions on the love that we have for kids, right? From very early, right? We start to feel disappointment. We start to project onto the kids our expectations of success. And so I was telling, this was my graduation speech, right? And I told the kids, I was like, look, we were screwed up as parents, and I'm sorry for that, right? Like I apologize collectively on behalf of all the parents to our graduating class. And I said, some of us, got to we climbed the ladder of success just to realize that the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
And I told them, really, the only thing that we can offer you as parents is just grace, right? Like an unconditional love, and remove expectations that we have, because those expectations are ours, not necessarily yours, right? And we've been like projecting our dreams onto you instead of, actually just letting you grow up, letting you screw up, letting you fall on your face, letting you get up. And it's interesting, like I'm mentioning this because this speech, right? Like parents actually, they were like, I got more feedback on that talk than anything else because I gave parents permission to say, you know what? Like my child's success or failures are not mine. And I can step back and relax for a moment and just let them be who they are, right? So, when it comes to, the biggest tensions we have in schools, is a lot of misplaced expectations, right? And I've been there as a parent, so I get it, right? I get that anxiety. But once I give parents permission to say, look, take a step back, right? Like you're projecting your own insecurities, you're projecting your own fears onto your kid, and that's not a healthy thing.
No, well, and you think of your upbringing. Like, I would love to talk to your parents when you were in 10th grade and be like,
yeah,
like, can you believe he's gonna go to Columbia? You know what I mean? Like, they were not raising you to go to an Ivy League school and become a doctor.
You were not being
no.
They were just like, keep the lights on.
That's right.
But look what happened.
That's right.
Like, I feel like things are going to happen the way they're supposed to happen. Like, I think what you say is so true. Like, I want my kids to talk to me. Like, I want my kids to like be safe in talking to me about things. I want
our job is to be get out of their way.
Yeah, like Dodger wants to golf. Like, I'm not setting up his, like, you want a tee time? Like, at Fox Hollow, you call.
Yep.
Like, you make them do all those little things. Like, you've got to learn to socialize on your own and to have that agent that, like you talked about, like the helicopter parents. It's just like, you're just stealing. Like, you want your kid to be this.
Yeah.
But you're actually, like, really hurting their chances of being that by doing all the work for them.
That's right. That's the paradox.
It's so sad.
Well,
like,
so this weekend we were in New York with Cash, and it was funny because we've learned. I mean, Susan, I'll never forget the very first time she came on the podcast. She's like, "Make your kids order for themselves."
Right.
Like, so simple, but like it's something that stuck with me. And so, like, anywhere we go, places, like even my 5-year-old, I'm like, if you want something, you have to ask this person and tell them exactly what you want. But so we're in New York, and Cash is going up to complete strangers in the big city.
right.
I'm like, hey, if you want this, go figure it out.
Yeah.
And like one time we sat back and Jen was like, I would have never been able to do this at his age. Like, ever. I'm like, either would I. Like, even before my mission, like the joke was like, my mom would call and order food for me because I didn't want to. You know what I mean? And it was like, I wasn't forced to do any of that kind of stuff.
Well, the paradox, right? The parenting paradox, and I think it's also the paradox in schools, is when you let go of control, that's when kids become the freest, right?
Yeah.
And the freest sense of themselves.
Well, they're different than you. They're not supposed to be you. Like, they're supposed to be them.
But can you be self-secure enough as a parent?
That's it right there.
And do you have enough sort of security on who you are as a human to allow your child to do that, right?
And that's it, because most parents think, if my child doesn't do this, what is my neighbors going to think about me?
That's right. So your own is...
See, that's the bullshit that I hate.
Not what they're going to think about the kid,
More
but it's like,
to add,
if my kid doesn't do this, what's everyone going to think about? Like, if my kid doesn't get into
just what
BYU,
that's right.
What is everyone going to say about us? Oh, you suck as parents.
Right. Or if my child does, we have, again, certain expectations and certain benchmarks of what success looks like, but they're just backwards, right? Yeah. So again, back to the speech that I gave, I sort of flipped that idea on its back, right? And I told the kids, look, our expectations that we had about success were wrong, right? And we've messed up as parents, and we probably have mistreated you because of that. So we need your grace now,
as your amazing,
in order for us to continue in having a healthy relationship now as you go into adulthood. Again, parents,
they'll forgive you when they start doing it to their kids.
What the?
They'll forgive you when they start doing it to their kids.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly.
But it's funny. Like, it is interesting. It's like, if somebody asks you, like, hey, you went to Columbia, you got a master's at BYU, like, what do I need to do? You're just like, all right, move into a labor camp in a different country, make less than $20,000, like, and you just work. Just let your kid go to school.
Right.
As long as he gets a 2.0, he's good. And then he'll go on and get it. But isn't that interesting?
Isn't that
like,
crazy?
Could you imagine somebody
what the parents would say to you?
Oh my gosh, like, wait, what?
Yeah.
You mean I don't have to be at every parent-teacher conference? I don't have to like call them when my kids' grades are low and blame it on the school or the teacher. Like, it's interesting.
Well, and that's part of the problem is everyone plays victim. Everyone plays victim. And how easy would it have been, Fidel, for you to have played victim?
Yeah.
Immigrant, don't speak the language, don't make any money. How easy would it have been to blame society and everyone else around you? But you learn to laugh, right? You learn to be happy, but then you also learn to control what you can control. And now look what's happened.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. You know, there's a danger, right, in projecting your failures to other folks, which is victimhood, right?
Yep.
And don't get me wrong, man. There's a lot of crap that happens in society where we do have folks that are victims, right?
That's true. That's very true. I don't want to
right, for sure, right? But what I'm saying is sometimes, you know, when we sort of take on that label and we own it for too long, I think it harms you,
for
right?
Sure it does.
It limits you. It you know, and I didn't.
You can't move forward. You just can't.
You can't, right? Because you know you carry all that weight,
yep.
You know, and you're projecting all that weight, you know. So it makes it really difficult. So yeah, I mean, you know. I didn't know what the word victim meant when I was in high school, you know, so I did it, you know, so I just sort of, I was just, you know, it was just life, right? It was just life. I didn't know any different.
Well, there were probably a lot of kids around you going through the same thing. Like,
yeah, I did. I had
normal.
a lot of friends where it was just, you know, my life was just normal, right?
Yep.
So here we are now, right? And as an educator, I'm trying to funnel, right? Although and intertwine all these lessons, right, that I've grown up with, all these experiences, and trying to create community, an educational community, where hopefully all those ideas inform, right, what I'm trying to do as a school leader and as a community leader, right?
Yep.
I think a lot of people don't really understand how it works. Like, I'd love to talk a little bit about what we were talking about before, just how school districts have different, you know, we were talking about Alpine. Like, I was kind of complaining about Alpine School District and property taxes. But what's interesting about your district that you were talking to us about before is BYU and IHC. Like, you've got, when you look at, I don't think people understand this, right? Like, especially with a school like Timpview that still has that, like,
when I came in and I told them about like the funding, you're like, they got plenty of money.
Right.
That was like the first comment, right?
You would think that.
Yeah.
But then I was so interested to hear, like, where I live, everybody pays their property taxes, and holy hell, like 80%, 90% of it goes to Alpine School District, right? So I never really thought about the fact that here, like your boundary alone, how much of it is student housing? One, which I guess you get property tax from that. But does BYU pay property taxes?
I don't believe they do. They're a private institution.
Here comes the politician.
To my understanding. Well, look, here's the reality, right? Public school funding is it's a hotly debated topic, right? Because you have the state that puts in money, right? They allocate a WPU, which it's basically a funding number that every kid, that goes to school.
Is it equal gets. Or
yeah,
do they?
Yeah. So that's the same across the whole state of Utah, right?
So like a school up like where I live, where there's people on the hill, they're getting the same amount of funding from the state
as the kid
as somebody from like down here in Provo,
or somebody in St. George, right? So when the state legislature sets their education budget, they base it on this WPUs, right? Now, historically in Utah,
which is just like a cost per head, essentially.
Yeah,
right?
it's a weighted pupil unit is what they call it, right? So you can probably Google it. What it is today is probably somewhere in the $6,000 to $7,000, right? So, and again, I'm just we could look it up and get the exact number, but yeah. So every school district in Utah, if they have 13,000 kids, they get 13,000 kids times whatever that WPU is, right? So everybody gets the same. Now in Utah, that number has been historically low, and in fact, it's been the lowest in the entire U.S. Right?
Why is that?
What?
Like why?
Like what is that?
just because the legislation,
That's why we have surplus.
like the politicians don't think they need to give more. And to your point, this very hotly debated.
It's hotly debated, and we could have a lengthy conversation about why that is. I mean, you'll have folks that will say, well, look, in Utah you have more kids than you do, in other places, so that's why we're the lowest. There's a lot of different reasons, right? But we're still pretty low. I think if you were to Google it and say, where does Utah funding stand, it's still among some of the lowest in the country,
really?
Right? The WPU, that WPU part, right?
Right.
So that's one part of the funding, and the other half of the funding comes through property taxes, right? That school districts generate depending on their location, right? So if you live in a place like Alpine, you have access to a lot of property. You have a lot of property, high property values, and you can generate a lot more money than if you live in an area that's impoverished, right? So that funding mechanism really creates some inequality, right? Because it's bad.
Like bad.
That's bad. But then, and then once you leave Utah, right? You go to places where, again, the structures are very similar in other states, but, you can be living in, the areas that have the most poverty have the least amount of money, right? Because they have the lowest values.
Sure.
If you go to a place like Heber, right? Ironically, Heber has better funding than Provo.
I can't afford to live in Heber anymore.
And they have, all those homes that have high values, they pay, a good chunk of change in property values towards education. So that's why they're better funded than other school districts. So I'm simplifying, there's more nuance to all of this stuff, but it is tricky, right? The funding that goes towards education. And yet it's expensive to educate kids, right? I mean, listen, 25% of the kids that come into my high school don't read at grade level, right? 14-year-olds that are reading below grade level, right? And how do I take that kid? I have 4 years with them. How do I get them to read and to be successful in high school when they can barely read? I mean, basic stuff like that, right? They're not doing math where they need to be doing. So,
and maybe they don't have access to internet.
Technology is a whole different things, right? So educating a kid is expensive, right? Then you add a child who has a learning disability, right? It's not cheap to educate a child who has a learning disability, right? And it shouldn't be, right? And yet that's where, again, funding becomes really essential, right? I
got so much respect for teachers. To hearing this, like, what does your average teacher make at your high school?
Probably, on average, probably 60,000.
Okay, so 60,000
into today's market, right?
Which is, it's good, but it's not like they're living high.
No,
right?
No, think about it, right? What does it cost to rent an apartment? Today, right?
Yeah. But like you think about that, and then you expect this teacher to be able to identify these students, how they learn, teach them differently. You know what I mean? You're asking them to do so much.
Well, you can have, in a classroom of 30, 34 kids, 35 kids, you might have, half of those, or, maybe you have 60% of those kids that are reading where they need to be. Then you've got 40% that don't, so you got to think about. Then within that class, you might have, 6 kids that are learning English as a second language. You might have another 5 or 6 kids who have a learning disability, right? Then you have 2 or 3 kids like Cam, who have a behavioral disability, right? And then,
how did you know that? Wow, you really do have a PhD.
So, it's a tricky thing to do, right? Try teaching, and you're trying to teach them Shakespeare, right? Which, again, that's another conversation. Should we be teaching kids Shakespeare?
Hell no.
No.
We shouldn't be teaching them trigonometry either.
No.
Or even calculus in high school.
No.
Like, we shouldn't be learning. It's such a waste of time. And I got to play devil's advocate here for a second with teachers. Because, see, I don't think teachers is necessarily the issue as much as funding for maybe it be programs or specialty educators. Like $60,000 a year, how many work days is that? Like, that's what people don't factor in. Like, I'm probably gonna get mad. I'm probably gonna get in trouble for this.
For what now? For the
how many days worked do you make your $60,000 a year? A lot of people make $6,000 a year working 300 plus days. So like last year I had a little issue. I spell checked my kid's book report, right? So he had to go to bed. So he's like, as long as it checks out, just hit enter so it sends in. It was graded instantly by like a computer program. It's like, what the hell? Like the teacher didn't even have to correct this. And then he gets 2 weeks off for some made up holiday. I was like, that's my struggle, right? Yeah. Like I have friends that are teachers just like, we only make this, we only make that. I'm like, okay, but you only work half the year. And there's more days off now for kids than I've ever seen ever. Like it's the unpopular argument, but that's why I'm saying I don't know that it's about paying teachers more. It's more about hiring more of them, funding programs. And I mean, so I mean, this is all a question.
Yeah. No,
this is not me saying that I know.
It's a fair question, right? Because that's what folks see from the outside when you're peering into a school. What you're not seeing, right, is the volume of work that a teacher's taking home. For sure. Right? So like, for example.
But that's why when I turned in that book report, I was like, are teachers still correcting papers? Or is there just a computer
and that's a good question. I mean, I think a good teacher is doing the work themselves. They are reading the papers. They're giving the kids the feedback. They're grading the math assignments. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because this thing was graded, sent right back.
Yeah,
done.
Right.
I was kind of shocked by that.
Well, and then you're talking about an elementary school as well, right? So
Ridgeline Elementary,
and elementary schools will have fewer kids, right? I mean, a teacher in elementary school teaches, 30 kids perhaps on average, versus a high school teacher will have, again, 180, 200 kids on their roles that they have to, be teaching, right? Does that make sense? Right. So
that's something to think about. I never thought about this. You have a different group every hour.
The other thing that people don't realize is how emotionally taxing it is to teach, right? So when you stand up for 1 hour of trying to control a group and trying to give them a lesson, trying to sort of walk them through a process, that's pretty damn taxing. Now you multiply that by...
you do that 8 times a day or 7 times a day.
Yeah, 7 times a day.
You have to change it up for every group.
And you have to keep the same energy with it, right? How do you account for that, right? And the ability to do that. How do you account for, again... we push teachers really hard, right, to make sure that they are emotionally connecting with kids, that they're creating safe environments, that they look out for all these different learning interests, right, of kids. So you have to become really an expert, right, in how kids learn, right? And, teachers are also dealing with, all of the sort of, the socioeconomic differences, right? Then you're dealing also with, the emotional stability or instability of
social
kids,
media,
right?
They should get an extra 20 grand.
You're dealing with
social media.
with the societal pressures, right? Yeah. You might have a kid that walks into your school wearing a Make America Great Again hat, and then you might have a child in there who's saying that's insulting to me. A teacher has to deal with that, right? Then you're dealing, with a child who was abused the day before, right? Physically abused, and they come to you for help, right? And as a teacher, you're dealing with that, right?
See, and that's the sad part. For me, that's what I'm saying. It's so unfair to ask a teacher to do any of that.
But we're not funded, right? I mean, like at my school, I have one social worker and an intern, right? For 2,500 kids.
Right, it's crazy.
Right, and again, so yes, so on paper you say, okay, the teacher has a 180-day contract, they're getting paid $60,000, they're making X amount of day in comparison to a dude who's out there working construction. They have to work, 300 days a year to do that. But again, it's hard because then you're not comparing. It's unfair, right? The comparison because of the work that's happening, from bell to bell. Are there bad teachers out there? Absolutely. Well, and there are teachers.
It's almost like the police, an argument of like defund the police.
Right.
Right. It almost sounds like you can argue
but
similar
the police
types
don't
of
get
arguments.
180-day contracts, right?
That's true.
But
That's very true.
But my point, and I don't want to be misunderstood here because people will be pissed at me, but it's not that the teachers, I guess what I'm saying is, what is the hardest thing about teachers, in my opinion, is that all of that falls onto them.
Yeah.
Like, I think like if you're working 180 days and if all they have to do is teach, I think that's a pretty fair number, right? But that's the part that I was talking about is what's so sad about the funding is you should have 5 or 6 social workers or psychologists or counselors to work with kids. Like we should have plenty of funding for sports and after school programs, because all that stuff ends up falling onto the teachers.
Yeah.
So actually, I don't expect the teacher to have to do all that, but
you're making my argument.
So that's what I'm saying. I think we agree.
I have a question for you. If you had extra money, do you think it'd be more beneficial to pay teachers more or to hire more at the same rate?
It's a tricky question, right? Because when I hire a new teacher, at least in our community, right? I can't speak for other communities, and a first year teacher is going to make $45,000-$50,000, right? What can you do with that with those resources, right? I mean, after you pay rent, after you pay your car payment, after there's and we're talking about after 4 years of college, right? If you have a student loan, right?
Well, you can't really go get like a steady job.
Independent of that, for the benefit of the student, independent of their living situations, I'm just talking about for the benefit of the school or the student. Do you think it would be better to have
more teachers or
more of them making that amount of money so they could spread the workload out? Or would it be more beneficial to pay more that maybe you're going to get a more experienced person that knows how to handle that better?
Yeah.
Or 3C programs like counselors.
Yeah.
More coaches, whatever.
But that's kind of number one, though. So that falls underneath my umbrella of number one, like to bring in more humans.
So here's the thing, right? Like there's research shows, right, that a teacher who's a really skilled teacher, who really understands how learning works, who really understands good teaching practices, those like they're golden, right? And they can help a kid who's behind, a year or two in reading catch up in 6 months, right? So the better question is, how do you develop that type of skill? Does that make sense in a teacher?
I haven't thought
and that might require more training. That might require that teacher to perhaps teach a little bit less, so they can spend time,
right?
Yeah,
spend it on trainings.
Well, that's now we can go back to the cop argument.
Yeah,
right?
that's exactly what it is.
So it's so if you can have really high quality teachers that stay in the profession as well, right? Retention's important, right? We haven't brought up that conversation because you do have, at least here in this community, on average, the teachers aren't staying for a long time. And it takes time, right? Just like you guys know, in any profession, it takes time for you to become really good at what you do. Your 2,000 brisket probably tasted a lot better than number 20. You know what I mean?
It does.
So, the point that I'm making is that, if you can retain teachers, give them a living wage where they can afford to live in the communities that they live in, if they can, have have opportunities to really develop their trade, their qualities as a professional. Those things are what are going to make the biggest difference, right? I mean, it's I'm finding fewer and fewer teachers that are staying for the long haul, right? That are making careers out of their, a 20, 30, 35-year career. And those are the teachers, man, that by the time they hit year 15, right? They're killing it because they've become really seasoned,
and
right?
Part of that's funny. In fact,
that's supposed to make it worth it, right? Like pensions and everything else. Like it's like cops.
But to get there,
it's hard. Yeah.
Because we have our most favorite nanny ever, Annie. She's going to graduate soon and be a teacher. And she's like, I love this. I'm going to school for it. I love the kids. But she has a side business. She's like, I can make 2 times the amount of money doing something else.
And that's a great point too. You have these really smart people that,
they're very talented, so they can easily go and do something else to get paid more.
When a teacher's doing it right, when they're really paying attention at an individual level, when they're learning how to become better each day, when they are, grading, giving the feedback, when they're doing it, when they're doing teaching, right? It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
it's exhausting. And there's teachers that give other teachers a bad name. There's no question, right? And there's folks who went into the profession that shouldn't be there, right? And that's
like of everything,
like in everything else, right? But man, is the job easy? No, man, it's tough. You're dealing with human beings, right?
Well, I learned a whole perspective, like learning from you this last little while. dude, I'm dealing with this. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I'm dealing with this. I'm like, oh, hold on.
But
How?
see, that's why we have to ask those questions. Like,
For sure.
I knew that my question was not going to be a popular question, but at the same time, like, that's
a fair
how.
question,
but
man.
it's a fair question,
fair
and that's how we
question to
learn.
ask.
Absolutely.
Because to hear what a teacher, because see, I totally forgot about the elementary to high school thing. Like now, damn straight, get the computer software to read the book report, because I don't expect you to read 180 book reports, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's different. But yeah, it's and just so to clarify the number, we're 50th out of 51.
Okay,
Still.
so we went up, but we went up.
We went up one.
Yeah.
Idaho is now number 51.
crazy?
They were $100. So we pay $8,000. This is 2019, $8,014 per student per fiscal year.
Yeah.
And so, but see, the living wage is the other thing too that I never thought about. Living near the community, because cops deal with that too. Like,
That's right.
like a lot of them have to live 20, 30 miles away from where they work because they can't afford to live there. And so,
Yeah.
like the church subsidizing for missions, like it really should, like the fact that our education system is just given a flat fee per head is asinine.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, that is so crazy to me.
Well, and if you think about it, okay, $8,000, like, man, that sounds like a lot.
That's not a lot. No
Well,
way.
but think about it, right? I know families that pay, a lot of money for their kids to play a sport, right? Think about how much they're spending for or they're paying a lot of money to go on a vacation, or they're paying, and here we are, that's what we're saying, we're going to put $8,000 to educate one kid, right? Well, what is that worth, right? What is that education worth? Because if you think about how much does it cost to keep somebody, incarcerated, right? I mean, it's a lot more than that, right? So yeah, I mean, I think back to the conversation we were having about teachers, right? I mean, it's a very sort of nuanced, conversation. I think the questions you're asking are absolutely fair, because I think transparency is important, right?
For sure.
But I think a lot of folks don't realize how complicated it is to get a child to feel excited about what they're learning and doing it at their most vulnerable sort of stages in life, right? I mean, kids when they're 14 and they come to our school, anyways, they're starting to go through puberty. They're feeling insecure. They're feeling, their bodies are changing, their minds are changing. And we want them to feel excited about, learning, right? And about what's coming in the future. So it's not an easy task at all. And the people who do it well earn every one of those, dollars, right?
See, and that's the other thing. Like every 5 years, there should be a retention bonus, raise,
Effort.
something, right? But see, the other thing that we're not factoring in is social media. I would say these kids are probably showing up smarter than any 14-year-old in the past 100 years, right?
Yeah, so it's even more complicated.
But they also know how to use the snowflake system, right? Like, you can't say that to me. I'm offended.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and then their parents will back them up. So you're right. All stuff that I didn't think about, because it isn't apple. I mean, it's apples and oranges, man. It's so different. So I can't wait till you're governor. That's
good question,
exciting.
man.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, fellas.
All right. Well,
Okay.
part one is over.
Part one.
There's going to become a part 2 of this.
I can't wait.
It's good stuff, man.
That was fun.